Hi everyone, Magnus here, this time covering the Speed Chess Championship quarterfinal game between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Hikaru. That is still going on as of right now. They're playing in the bullet portion, but I have selected out two really nice games in the blitz portions that I would like to show you. Now, I will, of course, leave a comment like letting you guys know who was actually the winner and what the outcome overall was. But as of right now, it is getting quite late here in the UK, so I do just want to get this recorded and uploaded in time. So, okay, Nepo has the white pieces here, starting with pawn to e4 and Hikaru going for e5, knight f3, knight c6. We have a Roy Lopez, and Hikaru goes for his classic Berlin setup with the two horses, then brings out the bishop, which is one way to respond when Jan went for the anti-Berlin here, not going into the Berlin endgame, playing pawn to d3, creating this nice chain here. Pardon me, I think I'm about to sneeze. Anyway, the pawn goes to d6, and we get a very closed position, not a whole lot going on. Nepo prevents the bishop developing to g4. Hikaru moves back with his bishop, sidestepping any pawn to d5 pushes, pawn to d4 pushes. Knight goes d2. Nepo gets his bishop kicked around, and of course, as always, the knight's maneuvering. Not like that. The knight's maneuvering to these squares, always ending up on these two squares. Both these knights. That's just how it goes in the Italian. These knights will always nicely support these center pawn pushes from the king side, as well as potentially be good attackers in the future. So more maneuvering here. Both these pawn pushes, players looking to take space on the queen side, but neither one wanting to let them advance the a pawn too far. Bishop to e3 played, over protecting this pawn here, and possibly looking to thrust it forward. So we do get a capture. Now the bishop can capture, and that will reveal even more defenders to this pawn when there are three attackers. We do get a capture, and this move, knight to e5, is in fact a mistake because of this idea where you can trade this bishop first and then plant this knight in the center, freeing up the f pawn to start rumbling down the board and do some damage. So the knight does in fact go to d4. Now the f pawn is released, and white's position starting to look quite good with black having this damaged structure. Now I'm imagining, I'm not sure entirely, but maybe Hikaru thought that you could take on f3 first, but this would have been even more damaging with the rooks coming to the middle, and this d6 pawn gets super loose. So I'm not exactly sure what Hikaru missed there, but this position does look unpleasant with the damaged structure. Hikaru tried to lash out with pawn d5, trading off this weak d6 pawn, but f4 comes very timely from Nepo. Now these pawns are rolling down the board and doing some serious damage. Nepo simply wins a pawn here after these exchanges. He claims the bishop, and it's just a pretty simple pawn up position. Nepo is going to start pushing on the king side. He brings his rooks over to the g file, starting an attack against the king, and this nice move, pawn to f5, sacrificing the e5 pawn and saying that I'm actually just coming into your king. And so, like, let's say you were to take here. For starters, actually, there would be rook to e4, destroying and claiming the rook down there. But even queen takes h6 looks really strong. The entire position is just crumbling. So instead, after pawn to f5, Hikaru tries to lock it down with pawn g5. But, of course, Nepo sacrificing the rook here. Rook takes g5, brilliant move. Crashing through the position here. The king is absolutely stripped and left with like some clumsy pieces just hanging around on the back rank, nothing to do. The knight has to go to g6 and block. If you were to move to the side here, there would be rook to h5, king can move over, queen to g3, and you'd have to block with the knight here, or else you lose your queen. So the knight would go to g6, and this is just an even worse version of what ended up happening anyway, with the knight having to come to g6 and block. Nepo takes. We get f6, and Nepo ends the game in style with this move, bishop to b3, checking the king and forcing it on to one of these dark squares or up to g7. If you go up to g7, then we get e takes f6, and if the queen takes, then you can take the rook and then take the other rook, and that would be a win. And if the king were to take, you would probably get some brutal finish here. I don't exactly know. Queen to f4, king g7, and apparently, okay, rook to h5, and the rook slides in to h7 with a checkmate. And if you try to go rook to h8, wow, this is pretty nasty stuff. The queen would come here, and you would get absolutely checkmated like this. Oh my goodness, that is brutal. So anyway, king to f8 was played. Pawn g7 by Nepo. The king is smothered in a box. You have to give up the queen, and Hikaru decided to resign. Now, in this game number 2, which is the last game I'm going to be showing you guys, do let me know if you prefer just having 2 games rather than 3. I know that some of my other videos that I've done as recaps were quite long, and that can be a little bit off-putting. So, Hikaru starts knight to f3, and he goes for a reti system, striking with c4, this pawn sacrifice, sort of transposing into a Catalan position they were getting quite a lot of the time, where you try and sacrifice the c-pawn for pressure on the queen side. So we do actually transpose directly into the main line of the Catalan. We get some trades here. Queen a5, reclaiming the pawn, so black gave up a pawn of their own, only to try and win it back. First trading with the white pawn makes sense, and after castles, we do get Jan captures this pawn here. White's temporarily down a pawn, but it's going to quickly reclaim it with the horse, as Hikaru does. And pawn to b5, this very interesting move by Nepo. Now, this does look, at least to me, like this runs into moves like knight to e5, but okay, apparently not, because that would destabilize the knight. But there's all these knight moves as discoveries on this rook here. Looks very dangerous, and I do see that you can block with this knight here. But okay, I mean, that is kind of hard to see. Apparently, the engine is saying that knight to e3, you now put significant pressure here. And if you were to take the queen, you can take back with this knight that you put on e1. But though after bishop to b7, I don't exactly see... I guess you just have the damaged pawn structure, and that would be an advantageous position for white. You can simply gang up on this pawn here and blockade it with moves like e3, knight d5, and you're going to have some long-term pressure against these slightly weak black pawns. Either way, Hikaru didn't go for that. He instead put his knight on the g5 square, allowing for Nepo to play knight to c6 and block up this diagonal. I guess the difference is that if you went for knight to e1 or knight to c6, then there would be knight to a5, because this queen on c2 is actually defended nicely by this knight here, and you would suffer massively with this pin. So knight to c6 played, bishop goes to e3, hitting the queen takes on c4, and Hikaru's arguing that you've got a slightly worse structure, but at the same time black has immediate pressure on this b pawn, and with the c pawn helping to assist, pawn to b3 is the usual simple response is not possible. So the rook has to go passive defense, rook b1, bishop comes out to b7, we get some trades, and Nepo here is looking to just line up the cannons on the b file. Hikaru's saying you've got a weak pawn, but Nepo's trying to trade off his c pawn here for this b pawn and liquidate into the endgame. But Hikaru, very nice move here. Bishop to d4, defending this pawn here, preventing any c3 pushes that would try to trade off this pawn. Nepo, for some reason, doesn't go knight to d5. I thought that this was the most natural move, because I was thinking that you might be able to go bishop to f6 when I was looking at this, but apparently this is a terrible idea, so never mind. Oh wait, yeah, and then, okay, but apparently that was knight to c3, rook e1, and then you can take on b2, but I don't exactly know what the problem was with this. Oh, you can take with the knight, and then white is just up a pawn. So I guess that's why Nepo went for knight to e4 and pawn to c3, as you're about to see. He pushed this pawn forward, And people were saying that pawn to b3 looks like it was a good response for white, because you leave the black with this c3 pawn. I believe this was what the commentators were saying. But after rook to c8, apparently you're getting in a little bit of trouble here. Even though moves like rook to c2, stacking the rooks, look quite natural, apparently black is just building up a big like pawn wall here. And this c3 pawn, while it does look weak, is actually quite strong, and you can never put lots of pressure on it with these rooks because the bishop will always kick you out with bishop a3. Anyway, knight e4, we do get trading of pieces, bishop f6, and followed by more trades. You cannot take with the rook, by the way, which would be the pleasant move because, of course, there is back rank. So basically, Hikaru gets this nice initiative with the knight coming in and attacking all these weak black pawns. Nepo has to passively defend with his rook, and this nice move, pawn to a3, preventing the bishop going here if the knight is to come and attack it. And after h6, knight to e4, Nepo has to play a move like rook to c8 and try and transition into this endgame here, which Hikaru goes for. He's a pawn up, and he's going to try and grind. So pawn to g5, Nepo starts advancing his g-pawn all the way forward to try and clamp down on the white pawns. King comes up, and we get this classic situation where the rook gets behind the pawn, trying to prevent the white rook from coming back with a check and pushing this pawn all the way up. The black king can try and shelter itself in front of the pawns or stay on g7 sorry, not g7 or f7, g7 or h7, moving back and forth, from which the rook cannot move and skewer the black rook. So as expected, we just see some shuffling by black here. White starting to bring the king all the way over and run into the position. And finally, Hikaru tries to start going after this h5 pawn and exchange it off for the a7 pawn, but at the expense that his king has wandered all the way out into no man's land, jumping like a horsey, grazing on the b3 square in a very suspicious way. So Nepo does get this a7 pawn, and the position is dead equal after the rook cuts off the king and the king can no longer get back. Nepo's simply going to start trading off all the pawns and should make an easy draw. Also, it's seen. So the king starts moving around. Nepo's just waiting. Nepo's not doing anything. Hikaru initiates one trade. Nepo continues pushing his pawns forward and now just starts stalling the c-file. Hikaru tries to break the stall on the c-file, but this is highly risky as now this f-pawn and this entire pawn chain is very weak, and the black king can easily start to run in while the white king is very far away. So Hikaru starts going for this passive defense setup. Nepo cuts the king off once again, and you can already see the evaluation bar at 0.1. Black is starting to gain a small advantage. Maybe white's going to have to hold a pawn down endgame or something. But of course, Hikaru up a pawn, probably not thinking about that and not thinking that he wants that. He's been pushing this whole game. He's up on time. Nepo only has 15 seconds and Hikaru has 38. So pawn gets pushed to e4, preventing any more pawn movement, and king is now in to f3. And all of a sudden, Nepo has transitioned into this very nice looking endgame with an extremely advanced e-pawn. Hikaru finds this amazing move, pawn to g4, guarding his rook, so that if you were to trade rook here, actually the pawn would start marching forward and both sides would queen at the same time and the game would end in a draw. But Nepo, with one last trick up his sleeve, rook f4, extremely devious move. If you were to take this rook here, it would be a losing endgame, because as soon as you were to start pushing here, you can actually take this pawn, and the white king cannot get back in time to get the opposition on the black king, and the black king will get in front of the pawn. And alternatively, if you were to start trying to bring in your own king closer, this pawn starts moving forward, and if you were to start pushing, then the black pawn promotes way too quickly. So this is a really sneaky move by Nepo, and apparently the only move by white to hold the position is this impossible move, rook h5. The idea being that you sacrifice the pawn and very quickly get the short side defense with this rook here, and the king starts to move back, and it's actually not even king king d4, which makes sense trying to get closer to the pawn, because then you'd start pushing and it would be a check. But it's actually just rook to h2, and you continue checking up until the king starts moving too far away, from which then you can get the king over and you are able to cover the e2 square. So this is extremely tricky endgame, and with such low time on the clock, rook g5 gets played, and Nepo blunders right back, which is very difficult to see why this move king to e2, super unintuitive, is a good move. The point is that you just don't allow any sort of checks from behind, and as soon as this king moves forward, say, you'll give e3 check, the king moves up, and now this white king is in fact blocking the rook from getting behind the pawn, and you're going to just push. But instead, king to f2 gets played, and now after rook to h5 again, or rook to f5, rook f5 would actually potentially lead to a repetition. So something like rook to f5, trying to go for this same exchange here where you start pushing, the king would go back here, and we might have even seen a repetition of moves. But that didn't happen. King went to f2, and now Hikaru blunders right back, king c3, a really logical move, trying to get the king closer to the pawn here. But now the pawn simply starts marching. And after the move rook to e5, it looks like white has just gotten to the pawn, and it might all be okay. But rook to g3, and Nepo comes up with this brilliant plan to try and check the white king away and get a classic winning endgame here. As he moves his rook back, you cannot take the pawn because then there would be a check and you would lose the rook. And alternatively, after the rook moves back, if you simply do nothing and wait, then you will get checked away, and the pawn will end up promoting, as the king can simply move out behind the rook, providing shelter here, and you will make a queen. So, a really tough loss for Hikaru. He was definitely frustrated after this game, but he did come back, equalizing the score in the next game. I believe he struck back, and then there were two draws. One of them Hikaru held with a pawn down endgame. As of right now, they entered the bullet section all tied up on 8 points each, and it's going to be very interesting to see. I mean, I'm immediately going to go and check out what's going on in the bullet, and of course I will leave a comment letting you guys know the result of the game. So if you guys did enjoy this video, please do consider liking and subscribing, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Bye.